by way of an elaboration, I want to say this. There are four modes of movement. There's local movement, moving from place to place. Substantial movement, when the steak becomes me, that's from one substance to another. There's a quantitative movement, when something gets bigger or smaller. And there's a qualitative movement, something gets hotter or hot, from non-hot to hot. So, but what we're dealing with here is local movement. And this is one of the movements. But we could use the other movements, but they're less obvious. And the principle of movement. That's to say, whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. So, let's look at that. Either it's from self or from another movement. Now, if it's from itself, it either had it or gave it to itself. If it had it, it'd been moving. But we said it wasn't moving. It went from non-movement to movement. So, it did not have it. If it gave it to itself, that means it had it before it gave it to itself. Before it received it. It had it before it received it. Which means it had it before it had it. Which is absurd. The only result is from another. Principles of reason cannot be proved. They're so self-evident. But they can be defended, as we do in that part of philosophy called epistemology, in the modern terms, which I don't like, or properly defensive metaphysics, a far better name, more descriptive. So, the principle of movement stands. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. The principle of limited regress is a corollary of the principle of movement. It follows from the principle of movement as another principle, that you cannot go back infinitely. You cannot recede infinitely. Everything moving everything. Instead of now having a problem, you've got an infinite problem. So it doesn't make sense. This all is dealt with around page 105 in your text. That area, dealing with the first way of proving the existence of God. If anybody's not receiving the text, please let me know. But note the simultaneity of the essential subordination. It is based upon this, that the hand is moving the stick, which moves the stone now, all together. And goes right back to the first cause. It's all dependent, here and now, not in time. Time has nothing to do with it. When Bob generates Ted and generates Joe, that's all based on time. That's what they say in Australia when the pubs are closing. Time, gentlemen, time. So, that principle of movement is utterly essential and self-evident. But self-evident means this. You've got a subject and you've got a predicate. A predicate is what's sayable about a subject. When they're both understood, they're seen to be necessarily associated. The principle necessarily belongs to that subject. The principle is necessarily involved in the subject. Movement, there's the subject. Is, there's the verb, the connecting verb, predicate, such that it is moved by another. And we defend it, as you saw. We can defend principles. You can't prove them positively. You defend them negatively. By showing to deny them leads you to absurdity. I'm reminded of a young man who once said, "Nothing is certain." "These things are not certain," he said to me. "Nothing is certain." And I said, "You're pretty certain about that." "No, I'm not certain about that," he said. I said, "Well, you're certain that you're not certain about that?" And he says, "No," he says. He said, "Well, I'm not certain at all." I said, "But you're certain that you're not certain that you're not certain." He said, "Oh." And I said, "Wait a minute, I'm getting mixed up too. Let's start again. You're saying you can be certain, and I'm saying you can't be certain." He said, "No, you're saying you can be certain, and I'm saying you can't be." I said, "So you're certain of the difference." Led him right into my trap. I think I've mentioned this in class once before, and he changed his life. Just that little confrontation. He said to my classmate, a friend of mine, another Australian, he said, "Boy, nobody's ever stood up to me like that before." He'd been a member of the Communist Party for 2 years, and of course, that's the most extreme dogmatism you can find, without any reason at all, contrary to all reason. Nobody made more mistakes in philosophy than Karl Marx. It would make a wonderful lecture just to speak on that alone, all the errors in Marxism. Anyway, we are utterly certain, and everybody assumes the truth of the principles. The fundamental principle, the supreme principle, is the principle of non-contradiction. Nothing can be and not be at the same time. Something can't be true and not true at the same time, under the same respect, of course. Well, the principles, the two principles, first the principle of movement, secondly the principle of limited regress. In a series of essentially subordinated movers, there's no regress to infinity. That's all in your text. So we used the hand, the stick, and the stone. You don't have to know how many movers there are. You must conclude in any case that there's something which gives the movement but is not moved itself. The unmoved mover. So we saw that there are accidental dependence. This is essential dependence. And the key to it, as Dr. Bonnet so often says, is simultaneity, happening at the same time. This must be moving that to move that at the same time. There's no simultaneity there. So, my friends, I summarized a lot of that for you. Now, what I'd like to do is to cast a few words about that first mover. If it's a first mover, it's an actual move, not a mover. If it was a mover, it would be moved. But it's an actual mover, let's put it this way. It might sound a bit contradictory the way I expressed it. It's an actual mover without being moved. A pure active movement without going from can move to does move. If it went from can move to does move, no longer is it the first mover. There'd have to be something which causes it to move in keeping with the principle of the principle of movement. So the first mover is one which has movement in its nature. But we've got to understand this. That what does movement mean? Acquiring something you haven't got. Now, for instance, here's local movement. I'm actually here, I'm only potentially there. Aristotle defined movement as the act of the potential as it is potential. The act of the potential as it is to potential. One character in Australia described as have come, will travel. Remember that series?
Yes.
Have come, will travel. Have come, will travel. So here we are. All the time we're still in potential, yet we're in act. Does not apply to the first mover. Or he'd have to be moved. He'd have to be moved. So it's an unmoved mover. And men have challenged down through the centuries, challenged Aristotle about that, saying, what does he mean? Is it the same as the God we know? Well, all right, there's no potential in it. It's pure act. That's what the philosophers call that being, pure act. When asked by Abraham, "Who is you, man?" he says, "I am who am. Am is my name." And it's very surprising that in a thing like the New Catholic Encyclopedia, it should have such a gross error. And you know, I wrote a response to that and was advised by a theologian to send it. He said, "You argue well, send it to Cardinal Ratzinger." Then Cardinal Ratzinger became Pope and I no longer could send it to him. It's still lying there, I haven't said it at all. But it says, "I am who I am." Well, you are who you are. I am who I am. You are who you are. That doesn't describe God at all. Am is my name, not just who I am who I am. How that crept into there, I don't know. I've researched theologians and all sorts of people, all sorts of works, which I have. And I can't find anybody, including the great Garrigou-Lagrange, who wrote 2 beautiful volumes on the existence of God, his existence and nature. Beautiful works they are. Well worth reading. So, we've dealt with that now, and there are lots of objections, principally by Kant and Hume. Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, David Hume, who has been called the greatest English philosopher, and of course the Scots are still laughing at that because he wasn't English, he was a Scotsman. And as Professor Father Martinelli said to me at Montreal, all our metaphysics today is based upon that of David Hume. Metaphysics. And David Hume, of course, really denies metaphysics. But David Hume made such a mess. If I hit a billiard ball that hits another billiard ball, we can have no knowledge of a necessary connection between one billiard ball moving and the other billiard ball moving. Try and tell that to some fellows down at the local billiard hall. They'll all laugh you out of the place. But David Hume made a mistake, because what he did in the first place, he assumed that the only knowledge we have is sense knowledge. Well, he's right. We cannot sense the relationship, but we can understand it. You know what this word means, don't you?
No. Oh, yeah.
You make an ass out of you and me. So that's what David Hume did. And if you read some of the philosophical literature today, read on the proofs of the existence of God. That alone will tell you. They set up false proofs and then knock them down. Try and reduce them to logic and do a hell of a job. So the objections against the existence of God are mainly based upon Hume, who could not understand the principle of causality, and Kant, who said we cannot know reality. Principles apply in here, but do they apply out there? We don't know, says Kant. I cannot believe when I read in Kant, I suppose that our knowledge of a tree is a composite between the tree and our mind. Fancy a man writing books and teaching philosophy based upon an assumption. He assumed that, I suppose. He denied that we can know the natures of things. Then he wrote 3 big volumes on the nature of knowledge, after saying we can't know the natures of things. There are more contradictions in great philosophers' works than there are women's hats. Women don't wear hats today, what am I saying? So, my friend, the objections are mainly based upon Kant and Hume. We cannot know the principles of reason, that's what they think. So, we go on. Now let's look at the next proof. We may have to recast these next class. We may have to look at them again. The next way, well, let me set up the first way, the one we've just dealt with, in a sort of oversimplified form. What we're saying is a stone goes from can to does move. There it is, from can to does move. That's the first way. The third way goes from can be to does be. All we've said tonight applies to the third way. That is to say, you can't go back causing things to be. A tree doesn't essentially be. Be, in other words, to exist. Be doesn't exist in the nature of a tree. How do we know? Because it can die. I've just had a beautiful plum tree die. My next door neighbour Joe cut it up and the town authorities took away all the bits. Unfortunately, we die too someday. So, if not to die, at least tomorrow. So, that's the way the proofs all go. The 5 ways, all based in something like that. We may have a chance to look at those. But the tree can be brought into existence. We know that once it didn't be, now it does be. So it's the cause of its be. Be is not in its nature, we know, because once it didn't be. If be was in its nature, it could not be. Must be, if it's in its nature. So we go back to something which is a pure be. So that's the third way. You can't go back through infinite regress in essentially subordinated causes to be. That principle of limited regress, you can't go back infinitely, is common to all 5 ways. It's what we call the common principle. The proper principle in each one is different. There are 5 different proper principles. One philosopher, a priest writing one book, says the 4th way does not involve causality. It does. It shows he hasn't understood any of the proofs when he writes that. It was said that his book of metaphysics, if you weren't confused beforehand, read that, and that'll give you all the confusion you need. And unfortunately, it was extensively used in seminaries in the United States. But all the 5 ways use this common principle and a proper principle. So that when an atheist said to me, I reject those, you can't prove the existence of God. Well, I didn't want to face him on his ground, so I put him on my ground. And his father Raymond, a passionate father, told me when I was about 18, always make your opponent answer the questions. Make him be the fall guy. I said, what are you denying? The proper principle or the common principle? Or the fact or the nexus? The nexus is the chain between amongst them in logic. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, you know the answer to what I've given to that. I've told you before. No, my friend, you don't know what you're talking about. That's the problem. You had no understanding of it. So, if you have somebody oppose this question, ask them how do they face the 5 proofs, the 5 ways. There's really 5 ways of the same proof. And the central one is this one, the 3rd way. That's the central one. It's the one that is the main one for professional philosophers. So, God, it argues back to this. God doesn't have be, he is be. Hence it says in the Holy Book, I am who am. Am is a part of the verb to be. I am who am. Not I am who I am, but I am who am. Am is my name, be is my name. One man, a very fine gentleman, I had a lot of respect for him and got to know him, and his translations, such as in the Pocket Aquinas, his translations from the Latin, etc., and he confuses being with be. And I have to go back to the Latin to find out what he's talking about sometimes when I read his work. And he writes being. Well, be is a verb. Being can be a present participle of a verb, or it can be a noun. confusion reigns when you read that. My students couldn't understand it. I said, cross the ing out on all in this passage, all where it says being, cross them all out. I went to the Latin and found that what he was actually translating. But philosophers sometimes can write, as Woodbury used to say, rubbish. There's more rubbish written by philosophers than probably any other subject. That's why we come in for nothing but disregard. So this third way, you argue back to a pure be. You can't go back infinitely. And you argue from essential causes of be. The second way, for instance, we may as well mention that while we're passing. The second way argues this way. There's a tree plus a gash. The axe, the hand, etc. But the tree moves the axe to cause the gash. And the same again, you can't go back through infinite regress. You must come to a first, which is a pure gasher, if you like, or a pure cause, the ultimate cause. It needs reflection, my friends. Reflect over these things. Reflect over, read about them. 2 volumes written by Lagrange, God, His existence and His nature. As Dr. Bonnet said to me, it's got everything there. I had 2 sets and I gave him one. And, oh, he's so thankful for that. Beautiful work. Then there's another work written by Lagrange. This is a 1 volume, The One Nature, I think it's called, or The One God, I think it is, it's called. Beautiful work. I've got it at home. But then those books, there's another book too, by the way, Maurice Holloway. An Introduction to Natural Theology, I think is the title of it. I'm pretty sure it is. Maurice Holloway. It's a beautiful work. The trouble is that somebody says he theologizes a little bit much, too much. I can't say that. I haven't discovered that anyway. You see, the first way is the principle, whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. The second way, no thing is efficient cause of itself. And the third way, if it is a being, every contingent being, let's say a being which may not be and may be, that's a contingent being. God is a necessary being. Every contingent being, if it is, has an efficient cause, even as regards being. So, that being, which is the first being, has in itself no potency. Remember, all beings have act and potency. All beings which are contingent, which may or may not be. That's to say, if it's a tree, the wind, if it's a rock, if it's a man, if it's a bug, they don't necessarily be, they can be destroyed. Non-existence can be brought into them. So therefore, they don't have be in their nature. There's merely potential towards be. We can bring things into be, bring radium into be. Then you find it starts to disintegrate almost straight away. Uranium's the same way. These things can disintegrate. So they don't have be that makes them necessarily be. They can become non-be, or have their non-being. When these things decompose, they go to other beings. So all contingent beings have to be brought into existence, like a tree. Go from can be to does be. And nothing can give itself be because it bees before it bees. If it does, if you say it can, it does exist before it exists. And that, of course, is contradictory. It's absurd. So it's the same principles. And you'll find that all in the pages. I've given you the first proof, the first way, as it's usually called, and the second way. But when we're studying metaphysics, of course, we deal with all 5 ways. Well, We can do it here, the 5 ways too, if you like. So the first way depends upon movement, the second way depends upon causality, and the third way depends upon existence. Now we can't say that God exists. St. Thomas in his second question says, an Deus sit. An means whether, Deus, God, sit. Whether God may be. Not does he exist. What does exist mean? To the Latin, ex, from or out of, sistere, to stand out of. Stand outside your being, outside your causes. God doesn't stand outside his causes, doesn't have any causes. If he did, then nothing could be. Either God necessarily is or nothing else can be. It's as clear as that. Because everything else needs to be brought into existence. My old friend, we'll just call him Father Barry. Barry and I were classmates at the Aquinas Academy. We went to the Angelicum, topped the class, published his thesis, and Father Woodbury nearly had a heart attack. He said to me, do you know what Barry's written? I said, no. He said, he wrote that an angel's act of existence is identified with his intellect. I said, that makes him God. He said, exactly. Somewhere in his book, he'd be shocked if he knew I picked a copy of his book up for $1. That was his doctoral thesis. That's the supreme insult to anybody, I think. Anyway, he said it was that the angel's intellect, his act of intellect, is identified with his intellect. That's God. With us, our intellect goes from can think to does think. You know, once you become an oldie, you know, over 21, you know that your memory starts to go a little bit, and you start to forget things, and you know then that your intellect can't come into act because it's all there. We say you probably never forget anything. It's recall is the problem, recollection. So you think to yourself, you know, I can't bring my intellect to act. I know it's there somewhere, but God is pure actuality. If you look at, my friends, a beach, I've got in mind, we have gorgeous golden sand in Australia. I can remember beaches 7 miles long. Others, they often name them after their length. 9 Mile Beach, 9 Mile Beach, I can remember. How many grains of sand are there? Every one of them exists, each grain. Billions, uncountable billions. Each one's kept in existence by that mind. That's why we should be in fear and trembling of that great mind, hoping to God we haven't crossed its path in a wrong way at some time or another. So everything which moves, all the movements, all depend on that one mover. They're all arguable back to that. Nothing gives itself the movement because it cannot give itself the movement. Now I've given you the proof of the third way, and the proof of the second way goes just the same. We might take a look at the other ways later, but I'll just give you an idea of it now. The fourth way. The third way argues from B, as I've just said. But there is a fourth way. And again, it depends upon oh, as they say in French, mercy buckets. Wait till you see, I had my 105th birthday last week. I was at the hospital today, of course, giving blood by some tests, and young lady says, and what's your birthday? And I told her. I said, it makes me 105 today. She looked at me for a second, thought, and suddenly realized. She said, oh, that can't be. I said, you don't say. The fourth way is more tricky, as Woodbury once put it, but he asked me to stand in for him one night. He said, that fourth way, he said, is tricky, it beats them. He was asking me if somebody who had given the fourth way, if he gave it correctly. Books say, oh, they handle it badly. This is the way they argue. That there's a pure, beautiful, a pure good, the properties of God, then if there are impure beauties or limited beauties, limited goodness, limited truth, etc., therefore there's an unlimited one. Well, how they leap to that is nobody's business. Anyway, this is what we're going to argue from. Limited perfection. I always think when I was about 17 or 18, riding with an uncle into some mountains on a bicycle. I remember it well, the gears broke down. We came across the Minamurra waterfall, which we set out to see. And I saw a little mushroom about that size. The most beautiful thing I think I'd seen for years. This little, beautiful mushroom. Then I saw Marcantia in the wet moss growing, like another little umbrella kind of thing with a moss at the basis of it. Beautiful in the lower orders of plants. But then later, I saw a kitten. It was more beautiful. Then I saw a beautiful dog. It was more beautiful. Then I saw a baby. That was more beautiful. There are limitations of beauty around us. Things are not purely beautiful. You can always find something else. Listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Bum, 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 bum. Excuse me. That's a beautiful thing. My squeaker nearly went off then. But we find that beautiful. But then you'll hear the overture to the Jewels of Madonna. Magnificent, elusive. Something that your mind, you're left wondering after you've heard it. All these things have limited beauty. This has a beauty that hasn't got. You meet a lovely little curly-headed girl with a freckle on her nose, then you meet another one, different shape, different size. Then you meet your mother-in-law. Holy mackerel! Then you realise how beautiful they are, the first two. Well, these are limitations on the beauties of things. There are limitations on the goodness. Ice cream's good. Chocolate's good. A beautiful tree is good. There's a tree in Australia, and the store, a big general store, has adopted this tree, and I've seen the original tree on a hill. It stands all alone. It stands out. It's a beautiful tree, just shaped like that, you know. And this one, it's beautiful. But then you meet somebody, and you meet a curly-headed little boy or something like that, and you say, how beautiful that child is. Different beauties, limitations. So in beautiful things, there are two principles. One, cause of beauty, and two, cause of limitation of beauty. Two principles. One which causes the beauty, the goodness, the truth, and one which limits it. Now listen to the principle. Diverse things are not from themselves united, but if they're found united, then there's some cause of their unity. The way a lot of these people go about, you say, oh, there's all participation beautiful. Participated beauties suppose the existence of a pure beautiful. That's an oversimplification of the whole thing. But listen to the principle. Diverse things are not from themselves united, but if they are found to be united, there's some cause of their unity. Water can be cold or hot. So water is not hot by its very nature. But it's found to be hot, then there's some cause of that unity. The water and the hotness are together. That's the principle. Again, you cannot go back through an infinite series of causes. Therefore, there's one cause of the perfection. absolute beauty, an absolute truth, an absolute goodness, and those kind of perfections. So the first three ways prove the necessity of God's existence. The fourth and fifth way prove the necessity of his perfection. So the fourth way is drastically misunderstood. Father Renard's work. Oh, God save us when we read that. Cause of beauty and the cause of the limitation of beauty. So there are two principles, not from themselves united, because they depend upon gradations of beauty, the beautiful. So therefore, none of them is beauty, all of them have beauty, limited beauty. There are different degrees of beauty. They're caused to be by some other beautiful. It may be directly caused by God. It may be directly caused by an infinite series of angels. Oh, what did I say? By a great series, not an infinite series. So then, that may be. We'll find that out someday, all being well. We don't know. Michael might be causing somebody else to cause some things. There may be a whole range of what are called by the ancients the intelligences. We'd refer to them today as angel. Angel is a theological word. Angel means, in Greek, double G in Greek is pronounced as eng, N-G. The same as, I remember so well, that's pronounced Pango Pango. I was landing at Nandi Airport in the Fijian Islands, and one occasion a woman says, I think I'm on the wrong plane. I said, why? What makes you think that? I was going to a place called Nandi, but this is Nadi. No, that's Nandi, ma'am. She was worried. She thought she was at the wrong plane because she heard the place was pronounced by the pilot. We're arriving at Nandi very shortly. I thought I was going to Nadi, she said. But that's pronounced in the Melanesian tongues as ng, like that, or ind with the nd, Nandi. So the same in Greek, double G is pronounced ng. And that means a messenger from God to man. That's the meaning of the word. So we won't use that in philosophy. The ancients used to speak about the intelligences because they knew that if they were non-material beings, that they're intelligent. And the ancient philosophers thought there were about 42 of these beings. They couldn't prove the existence of these beings, but they knew there was such a gap between the first cause and the highest of bodily things we call man. There's such a great gap that it doesn't make sense for that gap. God ought to have created those things to complete the distribution of perfection. In other words, he's created, what's he created us for? To share his existence. Well then, there must be degrees amongst beings too. And one is superior to the other. In fact, each one fills a whole species. Michael, for instance, is the same as the whole human race, only greater. So what power they've got, eh? The intelligences, those non-material beings, they call them intelligences in those days, spiritual substances, whatever you like to call them. They're so powerful that they're above the human race, and all of mankind together, past, present and future, cannot equal the power they have. When teaching young students, I've always insisted on something. Don't play with the Ouija board. You're playing with it, it's not playing, it's playing with you, you're not playing with it. It's more powerful than you know, and it's leading you on. I think I mentioned in Fort Erie about the woman there that I heard through Father Gruner's office, about the woman who's somebody connected with the organization there. Her daughter would not go down the basement. Mother was puzzled about this. One day she said, look, come here, you're coming down the basement with me. I don't want to go, Mum. As she's going down the stairs, she said, look, it's doing it again. There's the Ouija board, and the thing is of its own being directed and moving the needle, moving around. But when you're teaching students, there's always somebody looks at somebody else with a sneaking look as if to say, we did it, didn't we? The time I really got mad is when I was speaking about abortion, and one girl looked at the other as if to say, and you did it. I was mad as hell when I came out of that classroom. I didn't want to know if my student was doing that. I felt so sorry for the poor girl. The other girl, there's always some stupid twit that will give away her private sins, as it were. So, but the intelligence are very powerful beings. Well, we don't know whether they're standing between the first cause and us. We don't know that. But the second, the fourth way, and the fifth way can demonstrate the perfection of God. As you can see, there's a pure beautiful. And we can deduce lots of things. Therefore, he's ubiquitous. That's to say, he's everywhere. Ubi in Latin means where. He's everywhere. Well, think of that 9-mile beach. I don't think we could write the figure down about how many grains of sand are in 9-mile beach. I have said on many occasions that if we wanted to write a book on 1 grain of sand, what a grain of sand will do, you would take all the libraries of the world, you could fill them. Think of just glass alone. Sand mixed with soda ash. This amount of sand, that amount of soda ash. This amount, that amount. This amount, that amount. You go on infinitely. Then the refractive index of the glass is produced. The resistance to light, etc. You go on and on and on. You'll fill the libraries of the world just writing on grains of sand. They would go beyond anything we could do, we could write. I've got an introductory organic chemistry book at home. It's about that thick. All it does is just introduce you to the subject. Some of these sciences have done magnificently in developing them, but they're still one narrow field based upon observation and observation only, with some deduction, but it may or may not be true. And the scientists will often say nothing's utterly certain. As one relative of mine, a cancer surgeon, says, nothing is necessarily true. Everything is subject to correction tomorrow. He failed to understand the distinction between experimental science and deductive science, which philosophy and mathematics are, and theology. So, my friends, we can deduce from this the necessity of God's existence. He necessarily exists, or nothing else can exist. And we can deduce from the fourth and fifth way the necessity of his perfections. We can see he's necessarily true, necessarily good, necessarily infinite, necessarily ubiquitous, necessarily this, that, and the other. He doesn't have failings like spite, like the ancient Romans and the Greeks used to say one god was spiteful to another, that sort of thing. That's rather childish conceptualization of immaterial beings, little spiteful things. Like when I wouldn't answer the phone the other night, I got fed up with it, but I started to wonder, the person's phoning, and up to 44, my phone cut out, can't register anymore. I kept some count of 70 calls overnight I got from the one person. So, the contingent is that which can be and can be not. That which can be not is the contingent, but contingent things are brought into existence by necessary things. And God is the most necessary of all things. I think we'll finish there and take it up next class. Thank you.
Thank you.